Hey everyone, how are you? Really glad to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is John Havens. I'm Executive Director of the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. Very excited today to talk to you about prioritizing well-being in the age of the algorithm. And just to be clear, these are my thoughts. They don't necessarily represent all of IEEE. And thank you again for having me. So, the first big question I want to ask to start the presentation is, who are we counting on in society right now? And the number one answer is the caregivers. Anywhere around the world right now, we're all thinking about the same thing, among other things, which is COVID, right? We're worried about our family and our loved ones and what's going to happen with this crazy pandemic. And of course, first of all, I hope that you and your families are safe and healthy. But who are the people that we count on the most, that we're looking to on the front lines of taking care of us in these situations? That's the caregivers. These are the heroes that are literally saving the lives of so many of us and risking their lives at the same time. But now the question, who are we not counting in society right now? And sadly, the answer is also the caregivers. Now, I want to be very clear. Of course, we are counting on these people, meaning we trust them and they are doing amazing things. And also, of course, I'm trying to make a point. But the point here is that, as you can see from the slide, unpaid care work has enormous economic value, and existing metrics for societal value, especially the GDP, which most people know, gross domestic product, wasn't built to measure caregiving. Now, I want to be clear, this is not about demonizing GDP or saying there's anything wrong with making profits. Companies have to make profits to survive. People have to make money to pay their bills. However, when we only measure certain things, then those are the things that we naturally care about and prioritize. And when we don't have metrics for other things, we literally don't count them. So in the same way that we have to count caregivers by adding in what they do into the existing metrics we use, and that's what this slide shows in terms of how much more the GDP would go up if we recognize caregivers, and more importantly, how much more we would value them. And although this slide is for the United States, it's pretty common around the world, or I should say it is common completely around the world, that GDP was not built to measure caregiving or things like the environment. So now I want to talk about, in terms of all the artificial intelligence systems creators that are watching this, and thanks again, really excited to be here, and the data scientists, the machine learning folks, and IEEE is the world's largest engineering-based association advancing technology for humanity. So I'm very used to working with and very honored to work with engineers. But the question that I want us to focus on now is, what are we optimizing for as the definition of success for AI? And when we talk about optimization in data science or machine learning or artificial intelligence system circles, or also things like robotics, human-computer interaction, that term is very specific. It means we're wondering, what is it that we're building this system to do? What are, in one sense, the metrics for success? And what are we optimizing for? A machine or system is built to do certain things, right? A car moves from point A to point B. A medical system is built to increase healing for somebody. But I want to show you an example here that a friend of mine named Jonathan Stray, who works at the Partnership on AI, put together. This is actually the title of this, What Are We Optimizing For, is the name of his project that the Partnership on AI has put together. And I love his work. We're friends and colleagues. This is his slide, Jonathan's slide. And as you can see, it's a reconstruction of something Facebook did in 2018 with something called their meaningful social interaction changes. They actually changed aspects of some of their core algorithms to try to understand how they could improve user well-being, which is great. That's a lot of what I'm talking about today. However, the red box in the upper right-hand corner shows what metrics were actually in place to measure what success looked like. As you can see under there, the indicators for what was well-being or increased user positive output or feelings or emotion or a sense of increased well-being those metrics weren't really established. And it demonstrates that we obviously have in business and in policy with something like GDP, which is an economic or financial measure that everyone's usually pretty familiar with. It's really based on sort of quarterly ideals, which is also about looking backwards, right? When you have a backwards facing metric, you actually live your life, as it were, for about 4 months. And then you say, how did we just do in those past 4 months? As an individual, as well as a society, the logic is that you're kind of more focused always on what can we achieve down the line versus what are we focusing on now. So here, what we're optimizing for now with companies that have good intentions, with policymakers that have good intentions, with data scientists and engineers, everybody's got good intentions. But intentions are not something that we should be measuring for in terms of optimization. And also engineers, data scientists, this is an empirical bunch. These are people who like science, which I agree with, I salute. So now, what should we be optimizing as the definition of success, right? Meaning, instead of just what we already have, that red box that really is about optimizing, say, profits or exponential growth. And here I want to make sure when I talk about exponential growth, there's growth and there's profits, and you need a certain amount of profits to keep your business going, right? And you also need to probably increase profits a little every quarter or every year to make up for things like inflation, right? Exponential growth, however, means you have to make choices where each quarter, every year, you're not just trying to increase profits by a little, but by a lot. And while that's completely obvious, right, to anyone listening to this, it's also critical to understand that then that means the prioritization for decisions for businesses, policymakers, and that trickles down to us, right, individuals. Even if as a consumer we're buying something or as a citizen we're voting for something, in one sense, a very real sense then, that means the one indicator for about 7 or 8 decades, the GDP, that we all have used, or that society has often used as the definition of societal success, really drives a majority of our lives, even though it's somewhat invisible to us. So the question now is, what should we be optimizing as the definition of success that we haven't been so far? And the answer here is well-being. This is a article that came out not too long ago, a few months ago, late 2020, written by Joseph Stiglitz, who is the Nobel Prize winner in economics. This was in Scientific American. It's in August of 2020. And it says that GDP is the wrong tool for measuring what matters. So it turns out in 2009, President Sarkozy of France, the then president of France, asked Joseph Stiglitz to form something which is now called the Stiglitz Commission in history. And Stiglitz got together people like Amartya Sen and all these leading, economists. And the question that the economists were tasked with from President Sarkozy was, is GDP the best measure for understanding or measuring societal success? And even also, what's the definition of societal success? What are we optimizing for in society? And the Stiglitz Commission actually said well-being, human well-being, is easier to measure than things like exponential growth and finances. And more importantly, that was what the Stiglitz Commission said we should be using as the primary indicator for societal success. So why, right? Why should we be optimizing well-being as the definition of success? Well, let me give you some thoughts, especially with regards to artificial intelligence and the work that all of you are doing who are attending this event. You're all probably familiar with the ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI that's been produced by the European Commission's high-level expert group on AI. I have a lot of friends in the HLEG, so shout out to my friends in that group. Really appreciate all the work you're doing. And I want to read, you can see it here on the screen here, but I want to read a direct quote from the introduction of that document. And by the way, the blue sections and the underlined sections are underlined and bolded by me. We believe that AI has the potential to significantly transform society. However, AI is not an end in itself, but rather a promising means to increase human flourishing, thereby enhancing individual and societal well-being and the common good, as well as bringing progress and innovation. In particular, AI systems can help to facilitate the achievement of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals and supporting how we monitor progress against sustainability and social cohesion indicators. So, I'm a writer, right? So the structure of sentences also really matters. And here, where it says AI is not an end in itself, in the AI community right now, we're all thinking about words like transparency and accountability and explainability. And these are key things that we have to figure out. However, in one sense, you can kind of lump all those terms together under the term responsible AI, right? Meaning, what are we going to do? Like build irresponsible AI? Are we not going to have transparency? Like, no transparency for this AI, right? This is our job. It's like saying, let's build a car and make sure the car has brakes. Well, you kind of just got to build a car that has brakes. So we're all taking, and by we, I mean the community that wants responsible AI, we're taking 4 or 5 or 6 years to figure all this stuff out. But once all this stuff is kind of figured out and we have standards and certifications and assurances that all these amazing tools are safe and responsible, what is it we want them to do? Well, the first group, granted it's coming from one region of the planet, but a pretty important one in terms of this is the first region that's really dug in and working with groups like IEEE and so many others to create these principles, have said this, right? That AI is not the end in and of itself, but it is a promising means to increase human flourishing. By the way, flourishing is another term for well-being. Well-being is not just about your mood or happiness, it's an all-encompassing life satisfaction. And there's multiple factors to it. For humans, it's mental health, physical health, access to education, time well spent. It's sort of a sense of, can you be your best person after all your initial needs are met? And that's like an idea from Maslow, you may know. If you have water and access to food and you're safe, then the logic is human flourishing is what we're all really kind of here to do, right? Which is to live the best life we can in the context of where we are. The other aspect of human flourishing, which is critical, is the environment, right? The environment, meaning nature, has to be something where in symbiosis with human flourishing, all the AI we're creating it's not just that we can't harm the environment, we have to actually literally improve the environment, right? There's sustainability, but because the environment is sort of suffering right now, we have to really improve it. So I think my point here is made, which is this group, the EU high-level experts group, is saying AI in and of itself is not the point. The point for success, the definition of success, really is about human flourishing, which happens with human and environmental flourishing in symbiosis. And in the bottom here, I've underlined, we have to monitor progress against sustainability and these social cohesion indicators. So remember the word monitor, that's critical. Okay. So one thing here is you've probably seen, this is the framework for trustworthy AI that's come out from the EU. And I wanted to keep this here because this is a great, everyone's working on risk assessment frameworks and frameworks for AI in general. Businesses and policymakers understandably are like, okay, ethics is too esoteric. What does that actually mean? What we talk about a lot at IEEE with the work that I lead is ethics. We often use the synonym design. Right? Applied ethics is not just about talking about the tunnel problem or, saying Immanuel Kant said this about utilitarianism. It's about saying, here is my AI product or service, a phone or whatever it is. It has these algorithms. The end users are going to use it. What are their values? And then applied ethics is really about design methodologies where through real due diligence in ways that not all designers, and by that I mean engineers, data scientists, anybody creating technology at the outset of the technology, these are new levels of due diligence that we have to use, largely because of data, right? How data is tracked by humans. This is something a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, AI is just the new technology, the same way that 40 years ago or whatever, TV was the new thing. Well, there's a difference with AI, right? Artificial intelligence systems is vast. It encompasses machine learning and data science and inverse reinforcement learning, AGI, all these things. But all of it is also built on human data, or the majority of it is human data. And that data is accessed oftentimes in ways that we don't understand. And it's oftentimes used in ways that we haven't really fully cogently with agency given consent to its use. We just kind of, we're sort of beleaguered into pressing a button, go ahead, use my data, right? But the other thing about AI or these systems is now not only is our data tracked, but it goes to the cloud. And that data becomes available to dozens and hundreds eventually of partners and actors where we're just not kind of part of that mix. And to be part of that mix, we need things like data sovereignty, which simply means we have access and portability of our data. And that will give us parity, sort of an algorithmic level terms and conditions for our lives and our values, right? These are things also that go to metrics and indicators that are critical to think about, because we have to, as citizens and consumers or people, or all of our different roles and identities, we have to be able to kind of speak data back to the world that already exists in the advertising realm, especially because of economic means. So anyway, I wanted to show this screen and then circle this part here, right? Like we just read from the EU high-level experts group, a lot of different things that we have to think about, right? Transparency, respect for human autonomy, etc. These things are not ends in and of themselves, meaning, of course, every system as it's designed must respect human autonomy. So that's an end in one sense. But once it's being used, then the question is, what is the success metric? What are we optimizing for when that system is in use, when it respects human autonomy? And again, the logic here is provably to be able to increase human well-being in symbiosis with environmental flourishing. That's it, right? Think how amazing all these tools already are and how much good these different technologies are doing in the medical field, the insurance field, et cetera. But think of what it will be like with this idea of what's called the triple bottom line. If you haven't heard that term, it's a business term. And the easy way to remember it is with the 3 Ps: people, planet, and profit. Right? So profit is still there. We have metrics to measure profit, and GDP is the way that most people use that. That's great, right? The indicators and metrics of financial success or growth-based success exist, and we use them. So this is a yes and, right? It's GDP and beyond is often the term. But here what we can see here is societal and environmental well-being is what the EU high-level experts group, right, is also the realization of trustworthy AI. All these other things, of course, human agency, privacy, diversity, et cetera, right? But the kind of logic here is once those things are achieved, then what happens? What else can we do, right? When transparency for AI exists in the world, are we done? Is societal success taken care of? No, it's not. Because like we showed in that Facebook example, where there is not a clear, at least triple bottom line mindset, the single bottom line will reign. And that is not about being evil or immoral or unethical. It's simply saying that the invisible metrics that are very visible in terms of what we actually measure are defining the success of people on the planet if they aren't included. And that means we won't be successful. And right now, because of the planet, all the stuff that's happening with global warming, et cetera, and then people, mental health stress with COVID, it's just time. It is time for the triple bottom line. Now, if you're wondering how is well-being measured, if it feels esoteric to you, that's fine. I've been in the space for 10 years of measuring indicators, and it can seem kind of confusing. But let me ask you, if you've ever been to a hotel, which I know you have, even though with COVID, none of us have been traveling recently, what do you fill out when you leave? Now, even that AI is here, what do you always ask to do? You fill out a survey, right? A survey is subjective data. That's you giving your opinion of your experience. Well, as it turns out, over 60% of the GDP measures service-based industries. Service-based industries, by and large, measure and provide the metrics and indicators of their success with surveys. So well-being indicators, it's kind of a confusing name. Well-being is not just happiness or mood, right? Well-being indicators are things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of those goals, and they each have specific metrics for the success and measurement using data, right, that says this is how you can improve things like mental health. What you're looking at here is from the Social Progress Index created by the Social Progress Imperative. This has been out for a number of years, and multiple countries are given rankings based on, in the middle here, you can see the foundations of well-being. And you can ask things like, do people have access to an educational foundation? And whether it's in a country, a city, or even a neighborhood, a community, You can start to understand, do these people have access to educational foundation? That's actually objective data. They do or they don't, right? So the combination of objective data and subjective data makes up well-being indicators, and it's an incredibly powerful, by the way, empirically based science, both incorporating things like positive psychology and also economics. But what that means is the objective data is like census data. How many people are in this neighborhood? And then access to education is also something that's objective. Do these people, are they able to go to school for whatever reason? Then the subjective data is when you ask them questions like surveys, and there's a tool, a life satisfaction survey, which says, how satisfied are you with your life right now? And people answer on a scale of 0 to 10. And if you're saying, well, that just sounds like their opinion, yeah, you're right. That's the point of democracy, right? You're asking them to participate in their wellness and well-being. And it's an amazing way to provide feedback in a participatory design mindset that feeds into this whole idea, this whole massive opportunity. But it's also hugely about innovation and trust. Right now, a lot in the AI community, we're talking about trust and trusted AI and all these types of things. Well, remember that real trust actually means these devices, these algorithms, these tools need to be used by someone. And then the user says whether they trust it or not. And a lot of trust comes from these things like explainability, et cetera. But what if trust was also based on the knowledge that we all were building these amazing tools to not just prioritize the single bottom line, as well as things like safety, of course, and risk and transparency, which we have to do. But underneath it all, it was not just a single bottom line, but the triple bottom line, also known as well-being. And if you're kind of freaked out, like these are so many indicators and so many metrics. Well, I used to be an EVP at a top 10 PR firm, and I took this diagram just to show you something. Like when I worked in Porter Novelli, is the name of my PR firm I used to work at. We had dozens and dozens of demographics and indicators for things like moms, because P&G was a client, and we worked on Pampers. Right. So believe me, I had so many lists of indicators of what moms bought, when, what diaper they liked, and why. Those are the same types of things. They're indicators. It's data. And also similarly, then we'd ask moms with product testing, what do you think of the diaper? Right. It's not really rocket science. But now the point is to think of all the indicators that people may not know about, measuring the planet and things like mental health. And that by measuring those things, it's not just a point about avoiding avoiding harm rather. It's about understanding the innovation opportunities when you have these indicators you didn't have before. Also, I mentioned Porter Novelli, and again, full disclosure, I used to work there. So, shout out to my old colleagues, Porter Novelli in New York. But this came out just a month ago or so in September of 2020, this executive purpose study. And if you're saying, why do this? Well, 150 executives said that 91% of them said that business must benefit all stakeholders, not just shareholders, right? Triple bottom line. You have purpose-driven, real valid business excuses to do it. 150 senior executives. 88% said that now more than ever, companies must lead with purpose, and 85% said it's no longer acceptable for companies just to make money. They must positively impact society as well. And companies have obviously been positively impacting society since companies existed. But things like corporate social responsibility and ESG reporting alone, as important and critical as those things are, they won't get us to where we need to go with these beautiful technologies if the logic is compliance alone. Here's what we do to keep the planet from being on fire. Well, guess what? It's not working. And this is not being condemnatory to anybody, myself included. I drive a car. I like my car. We're all in this together. But the point is we all need to change this together, and we can, focusing on well-being. So as I come to the close of my talk, let's talk about this. How can we optimize well-being as the definition of success for AI? Well, I got a case study for you. Good news, 2 words, New Zealand. And I was going to say good day, but that's Australia. And I don't know what they say in New Zealand. So I will just say this. I love New Zealand because in 2019, they created what they actually called, it is actually called their well-being budget. And they got together and they said, instead of the traditional budget process, like you can see here in the gray, where in the middle you can say that they were assessing initiatives with a focus on value for money and strategic alignment, right? Financial measures were the main thing they were focused on, which with, of course, the other things that they cared about. But this process below means they said, no, We want to do more from New Zealand, and we want to understandably measure and know what well-being metrics we need to bring our people and our planet up to snuff with our financial needs. And if you go to their child and youth well-being work, which aligns with their well-being budget, these are just some of the indicators they're using to measure how kids are doing in New Zealand. Material well-being, right? They have an economic survey to figure that out. Child poverty. These are objective, hard stats they can find. And once they start understanding and measuring kids, remember about the caregivers I talked about? What is more important than the people taking care of our kids? And guess what? That's all of us. I'm a dad, right? I'm a caregiver. What about partners who are home with their kids, but they aren't paid, but they could pay someone else to take care of their kids and not be with them? Is that the society we want? And by the way, if that's someone's choice, awesome. And I'm sure, there's a lot of households where that's great. So my point is not that they should or shouldn't. The point is that if the parents want to stay home, they won't be measured for that. The care that they give their own kids won't be measured right now unless we say it is time to care for the caregivers. I will give now a shout out to IEEE. I'm not objective. I love my job. And I'm also honored I'm the founding chair. And then my friend Laura Musikansky really did the hard work. She is now the current chair, and I'm the vice chair of this standard that has already now been released by IEEE. The actual name is it's a recommended practice for assessing the impact of autonomous and intelligent systems on human well-being. But the way that I've been framing it lately, and it's been out for about a month, you can actually see the standard for free. I mean, you can read it for free. You have to pay to download it, but you can read it for free. But I've been calling this a societal impact assessment framework. And it really fits beautifully into this idea of how can we measure well-being. On the left-hand side here, you can see this diagram that Greg from our working group put together. Shout out to Greg, awesome diagram. And what you can see is the logic is not that it's prescriptive, saying here is what well-being has to mean for you as a designer, but it is saying you have to look at, there's about 50 indicators we include. Again, indicators like the OECD's Better Life Index or the Sustainable Development Goals, and say pick essentially out of the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, pick one or two indicators from each of those three buckets and really examine with applied ethics type methodologies before you actually even finish design, and ask yourself, are you going to increase human well-being and environmental flourishing along with make profits? And even how will the profits help increase flourishing for people and the planet? And again, there's so much innovation opportunities. Asking about the environmental increase for your autonomous vehicle, you can start using things like the Happy Planet Index and see how much green space you're going to save for the city where your autonomous vehicle goes. And that might be a reason that you get funding from the city. And also things like the conversion of parking lots to green space. Green space improves people's well-being, their mental health goes up, and that decreases costs for medical costs, right? So all these things work together when you're actually focusing on using well-being. This is a program that we've just started as well at IEEE. My email address, you'll see it in a second. You can email me. This is free for anyone to join. You don't have to be an IEEE member, and we would love to have you be a part of this. This is a whole new program with multiple people on the executive committee from all around the world asking the same question. How can we put well-being? How can we prioritize human and environmental flourishing as the definition for success, not just for society, but for these technologies? And in closing, this is my question to you, right? I hope you've gotten excited because again, this is not about condemning. This is the opposite. It's about saying, look at you, businesses, policymakers, engineers, data scientists, these beautiful technologies that we're creating in unison. They're going to be transparent. They're going to be accountable. But then what do we want them to do in aggregate? What is the opportunity? The opportunity is to increase human well-being and environmental flourishing, and know that we're doing it with indicators empirically from the beginning at the outset of design. So my question to you, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, is how are you going to optimize well-being as the definition of success for AI? And I got to tell you, I cannot wait to find out. Thank you very much.